Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces, along with ongoing coverage of other world events such as the recent elections in the United States. Now, the lefties are losing their minds right now over Trump's cabinet picks. I got to tell you, it's very interesting to see what's happening, and as the left here in the United States always says, elections have consequences, and I think we're seeing those consequences take shape. Now, additionally, we're also starting to hear and visually see reports on the ground in the ongoing conflict within the confines of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. What are we seeing? Exactly pertaining to the recent election of President Trump and how that could impact the course of the ongoing war. Now, we are seeing an uptick in the arrest of Ukrainian military officers. This is not reported very much. It doesn't often occur that you see these reports in which Ukrainian military officers are detained and taken into custody. Quite often under allegations that they are operating for the Russian Federation. Now, because it's such a beacon of democracy, we don't often learn the exact charges and why many of these Ukrainian military officials are taken into custody by the Ukrainian security services. Additionally, we are now hearing reports that elements within the Ukrainian state could possibly be pursuing nuclear weapons. Again, elections have consequences. Those consequences for the Volodymyr Zelensky regime is the spigot is going to be turned off. The ability to obtain a constant flow of funds to prop his government up is going to end. Now, that ultimately will be picked back up in all probability by the Western Europeans, such as France. The Macron government has basically stated that it is willing to enter into global conflict with the Russians over Ukraine. And obviously, French military supplies continue to flow into the Ukraine. Some of those military supplies are simply ineffective, and the Ukrainians are only really using them for internal security types of duty. But nonetheless, even though that the election has happened here in the U.S., the Ukrainians are still going to receive large amounts of military equipment, mainly from the United Kingdom, France, and some other European nation states. Now, is that going to be enough? Probably not. It was probably not going to be enough with the ongoing supplies that the United States have been handing over to the Ukrainians. Case in point is the Kurakhove pocket. This is the area in which the Russian forces are continuing to crush the Ukrainian military in the Kurakhove pocket. Now let's look at exactly what has happened over the last several days. So we're going back, and then we will move forward. And I've talked about this before, that eventually we will see one continuous line with no salient that exists. Now, what are the Ukrainians going to do? Well, ultimately, it's going to be in their best interest to withdraw. They're going to have to do that, or they are going to lose a multitude of combat units inside of the Kurakhove pocket, just as the Ukrainians are going to lose a sizable force that is continuing to operate in the Kursk pocket. Again, we do not understand here at MFAN the methodology or the rationale for the Ukrainians to continue to deploy a multitude of combat brigade sets in this pocket. They control no valuable territory, and we think at this point, as we have talked about before, that the Russians are intentionally not rapidly taking control of this pocket. We believe that the Russians could in fact take control of the Kursk pocket, evict Ukrainian forces, in all probability within a matter of about 80 hours, if they wanted to. We don't believe the Russians at this point want to evict those Ukrainian forces. We think at this point the Russians are very much happy with the deployment of those 4 to 6 Ukrainian combat brigades inside of this pocket that are getting hammered day in and day out, thus causing the Ukrainian military to constantly reinforce those units, which are essentially trapped by bureaucratic decision-making processes inside of the Kursk pocket. The Russians are utilizing standoff weapon systems to pound Ukrainian forces day in and day out, causing many times more casualties than what the Russians are suffering by essentially keeping the Ukrainian forces tied down in this area. But it's the Ukrainian government that is ultimately making that decision to deploy and continue to deploy forces in this area, simply to say to Western media that, hey, we have taken Russian territory. Well, yes, maybe. They've taken some potato fields, some sunflower fields, no major cities, no major transportation hubs, nothing of the sort. And at the same time, they're bleeding out personnel day in and day out. And at the same time, the main effort of the Russian offensive in the Donbass continues to be the collapse of the Kurakhove pocket. Again, this is a Ukrainian-supported mapping service that I'm using. Not a good situation for the Ukrainians in this pocket or the other pockets that are being formed as Russian offensive operations continue at an unabated pace. So we are continuing to watch what is happening on the ground. Make no mistake, an incredibly vicious conflict that continues and will continue for some time. Again, at this point, we don't believe that the Russians are going to stop. The Russians, after experiencing what has happened over the last 2 years, I believe that their internal policies have changed, the way they view the Ukraine in terms of what happens 5 years from now, what exists on their borders in terms of a Ukrainian entity on their borders. And I believe that has dramatically changed since the start of the war. The Russians, I believe, were probably willing to accept some things at the start of the conflict that now there is simply no way that they will accept. No possible way. Now, we still have some time until Trump takes office. We'll have to see exactly what happens on the ground. Again, I would not rule out the possibility of some sort of desperate escalation on the part of NATO or even possibly the current regime that is in charge in Washington to do something that could possibly escalate this conflict like no one has seen thus far. So we're going to continue to monitor, report, and bring you what is happening on the ground. As always, thanks for joining us. Have a good day.